Hi, this is Kip Ryan. Hope things are going well. As you can probably guess by the picture on screen, this is actually not an Infinity thing, but instead a video to collect my thoughts about a role-playing game thing that I did. Specifically, I'll be playing Cyborg, and I'll be doing it solo using the Game Apprentice 2nd Edition Cyberpunk Deck. Cyborg is a heavy metal, apocalyptic, cyberpunk role-playing game in the vein of Morkborg, whereas the Cyberpunk GM Apprentice deck is a bunch of cards that have prompts and tags and information on them that, in this case, I will be using to fuel my GMing in a solo game. For context, I've been playing a lot of role-playing games. I have not really played much Infinity since Interplanetario last year, but all the time that I used to spend playing Infinity and participating in the Infinity hobby, I have sort of redirected to role-playing games and the role-playing game hobby. And what's happening in this video today is I signed up with a group of people that I'm friends with to play a bunch of different solo games and then talk about how those solo game experiences went. We each have picked a different game and we're going to report back on how it went, and we're going to figure out the style as we go. One other thing, the solo game that I have by far the most experience with is Ironsworn. Here it is in front of you. I absolutely adore Ironsworn. I've played a bunch of Ironsworn. I've taught other people how to play Ironsworn, or rather had them teach themselves and then sort of hobby ambassadored my way through it. And if you were looking for a solo role-playing game based on my personal experience, and I'm not sure why you would do that, but if you were, I would definitely recommend looking at Ironsworn. It's a really cool game about, being kind of a Viking, Mandalorian, Witcher type person who goes and does perilous quests and all that sort of thing. And also, it's basically free. Like, you can buy a couple of supplements, but the core rules are free and you can have a great time playing just with the core rules. Even though it's not the focus of today's video, I love Ironsworn and you should definitely check it out. Ironsworn tangent aside, let's get back to what's happening here. So Cyborg is the cyberpunk installment of the Swedish heavy metal apocalyptic role-playing game Morkborg. And like Morkborg, Cyborg is rules light, flavor heavy, with tons and tons of art. Like, seriously, there's so much art in here. Every single spread in this rulebook could probably get sold as an individual print. And in some senses, the art can make the rulebook harder to use because you're so distracted by the art that you can't see anything. I bought Cyborg largely for the art, to read it and to look at it, and also for some of the rollable tables. I did not buy Cyborg with the intention of playing it per se. And I have to say, I have really enjoyed owning this book. If you want a book on your shelf that looks like the Cyborg book that you can open up and it has all the pictures in it that you're looking for, then this is a really good book to own. But I am not 100% sure that I would recommend buying it if you want to play the game, especially if you want to play the game solo in the way that I did. The other product that I use for the solo experience is the Game Master's Apprentice 2nd Edition Cyberpunk Deck. This is a deck of cards that kind of looks an awful lot like this one. I think I took this picture from TTRPG where I purchased the deck. And on this card you have, a whole bunch of things. It's got a difficulty generator that tells you how hard something's going to be. It's got an oracle that'll tell you yes, no, or yes question mark, or yes exclamation mark for odds of being bad, even, or good. It's got dice rolls for the different dice on there. It's got some pictures that you can use. All sorts of stuff that's on here. And what I'm going to be using this deck of cards for is every time I have a question, or if I want to generate a new scene, or if I'm basically looking to the GM trying to get a sense of like, okay, GM, it's your job, tell me what happens next, I'm going to draw a card from this deck, look at the card, and then use that in order to supply myself with the fodder that I need to proceed. This process of having an oracle and using an oracle is absolutely central to a lot of the solo role-playing gaming that I have seen. But what's kind of unique and cool about using this deck of cards is that instead of having a bunch of rollable tables, you instead have a card that you can draw. Having a card and having all of the information in front of you in a nice cohesive fashion, instead of spread across a bunch of tables that you have to roll on, means that I can look at the whole card and choose what I want and use that in order to inform the scene. And I actually really did like that. So just using the card that you can see right here as an example, let's say that I am watching an NPC try to get past a bunch of guards. And I say, is the NPC going to get past the guards uninjured? I think the odds of that are bad. It is not likely that they're going to get past. So then I would draw a card, I draw this card, and in the top left it says no. So no, they don't get through unscathed. Then I might say, okay, well, why don't they get through unscathed? And I'd look at the whole card, I'd see what jumps out at me. In this case, I would look at the picture in the top right, I'd see the little gun, I'd see the hand getting shot off, and I'd say, okay, well, a turret pops out and shoots at the person and maybe shoots their hand off. Or maybe if I went and searched the body of this person later, I would find that their belongings are some domestic papers. Maybe I'd learn their name is Daniel or Bobby Tables or something. And if I wanted to know what they were like, I could look at those traits of chastity, envy, and corporate and get the sense that this kind of person was a repressed, envious, corporate wage slave type. So that's how we're going to be handling the GMing aspect of things. Next, let me talk you through the events of the session. I will be playing through some of the Reaper Repo mission, which I think is free and comes with Cyborg. In this mission, we're supposed to show up at the house party of this violent athlete guy, Steel Jackhammer, and steal his cyberlegs. I made 3 characters for this job. Jonas, who is a punk that has no class. Chin, who is a discharged corporate killer who has a laser cannon. And Sopot, who is a renegade cyber slasher who wants to do all of the drugs. I figured that having 3 characters will give me a little bit more robustness, and also it's kind of like having, 3 player characters at the table. I decide to start the action right outside the apartment, trying to get past those 2 guards who are out front, and we begin there. The tone I am going for is a rage-filled, apathetic nihilism that I feel like the cover art here really patches through and conveys. My touchstones were that the world has ended and also is continuing to end, and also the apocalypse itself failed because it ran out of money and got bought up and sold for parts. I kind of imagine a mashup of Rage Against the Machine's Killing in the Name with that Pitbull song where he's talking about being out of money and partying anyway. That's the energy that I think this game conveys, and that's also the energy that this party by this Steel Jackhammer fellow also conveys. And in that spirit, my player characters are largely able to enter this party and start exploring the apartment really without getting accosted too much. The guards confuse us with some drug dealers, and we're able to walk inside. We meet some of the VIPs and sell them some cigarettes as if they are, high quality drugs. We meet a rando who's been infected by some nano plague and is trying to start a cult. And we steal the Shake Master 3000, which is a smart protein shake maker that has a genuinely benevolent AI in it that just wants you to be your best, most athletic self. Throughout that process, one of my characters took some drugs and went into a cyber rage and started slashing up the furniture. Another person found just some other person who was on the balcony and threw them over the edge. And we ended up making a deal with 4 other guys who happened to be here at this party for a completely different job. And the deal was that we would help them out with their thing. In exchange, they would give us a jammer gun thing that would turn off Steel Jackhammer's cyberlegs. I didn't actually finish the mission, but hopefully you're getting the impression that a lot of things happened. With the events of the game described, let's now talk about the good parts of this experience. As I just mentioned, a lot of things happened, and I found that the Cyberpunk deck combined with Cyborg was really effective at generating really interesting, fun scenes. I really enjoyed meeting and befriending this genuinely benevolent AI that was in a, freaking protein shake maker. And I took some nihilistic, old school Renaissance satisfaction in ignoring a fight and instead throwing someone off a balcony because that was just easier than fighting fair. From a mechanical perspective, I found that generating characters was really quick and easy. I found that piloting these characters was also really quick and easy. You've got basically 5 stats in Cyborg, and everything that you do, you roll a d20 and you add your stat and you compare it against a target number. The default target number is 12, but I used the difficulty rating on the GM Apprentice deck to tell me if it should be easier or harder, and I would compare that to the outcome of the d20 roll in order to see whether I succeeded or failed. When there was a situation that the Cyborg rules could resolve, I found it relatively straightforward to use those rules to resolve the situation. For example, when our renegade cyber slasher opens up the freezer and finds a bunch of drugs and does a bunch of those drugs, it was really easy to find the drug table in Cyborg and roll and see what happens. And when it turns out that what happened is the person runs out of all their health and goes into a cyber rage, it was really easy to understand how that was supposed to work too. Likewise, I was fairly successful at using the Cyberpunk deck in order to generate scenes and understand what was going on and find plot threads and stuff. I say fairly good because I didn't feel as wonderful about the Cyberpunk deck as I did with the oracles in Ironsworn. For example, in Ironsworn, I really find myself knowing exactly what table to reach for. I like the theme table, which has just a bunch of themes on it that you can roll on. I like the NPC tables that tell you who the NPCs are and what they're about. And by stitching together the themes and the NPCs and the settlements and all that stuff in Ironsworn, I find that I'm able to generate really successful, interesting outcomes and scenes and understand what's going on. In contrast with this Cyberpunk deck, I never found myself knowing exactly where I was supposed to look for what I was looking for. Sometimes I would look at the pictures in the top right and use that to inform my scene. Sometimes I would look at the sensory snippets in the middle and use that to inform my scene. Sometimes I would use those random event keywords across the middle, or maybe the situation in the bottom left, or maybe the traits. And because there were so many options, but none of them the perfect option, my process for using this deck was to draw a deck of cards, look over the whole thing, and sort of feel a little bit confused at first while I tried to latch onto something, and then I would latch onto something and use that to interpret the outcome. And that confusion was a bit of an interruption. Now, that being said, I'm happy to chalk up that little bit of inefficiency to inexperience. I have a lot of experience playing Ironsworn. I've watched a lot of people playing Ironsworn, and I have never used this deck before, nor have I ever seen anyone using this deck before. So maybe once I figure out how it's meant to work, it could go smoother. And the outcomes that it produced certainly were very good. It was just the ride getting there that I think was not as smooth as it could be. So, if I were rating this deck of cards all by itself in terms of how good I felt about playing solo with it, I would say, 1 thumbs up, and I can imagine being 2 thumbs up in the future. What's not thumbs up, unfortunately, is my use or review of Cyborg itself. And with that segue, let's transition to the bad. The reason that I did not finish this introductory mission is because I got bored and I felt like I understood the shape of what was happening before I was able to successfully finish it. What that boredom looked like was a couple of different things. First, it was that I felt like my characters would simply not engage with a lot of the scenes that were happening. Like, we ran into this guy who seemed pretty cool, who was like preaching about people getting a nano infested and it was working. And I thought that was kind of an interesting scene, but I also thought that my characters simply would ignore it. We had no attachment to it, and that was kind of boring. And also, I kind of thought, looking forward, what else is going to happen? Maybe we'll meet Steel Jackhammer and, I don't know, fight him. And the thought of fighting him seemed like it would be kind of boring. On the other hand, the thought of not fighting him also seemed kind of boring. We had this like thing that would turn off his legs, but it wasn't clear how that would help out and why that would be interesting. And so, despite the fact that we had spent a fair bit of time in this guy's apartment looking at stuff and how we had a rough plan about how we were going to go forward, I didn't feel like there was any particular reason to play through the execution of that plan. In other words, I just wasn't confident that anything interesting from a gameplay perspective would happen as we did that. And I really do want to chalk this up to the cyborg system itself in the context of this solo play. If you look at this art, and if you look at the art inside the book of what all the characters are doing, I feel like it screams a certain tone. A tone of nihilism and punk and oversaturated and rage, and also this notion that like the world is fucked and we're fucked and there's nothing we can do about it, and so let's just like put on our spiky helmets and our spiky shoulder pads and grab our guns and go, shoot at the corporations or whatever. And certainly, I felt super capable with the GM deck and with the rules of generating scenes that were consistent with that tone. I mean, we've talked about a whole bunch of them, and they were all really cool scenes. What was not cool is that I just didn't feel like the rules were empowering me with an ability to actually engage in those scenes. Cyborg, like Morkborg, is a OSR rules light system. Fundamentally, what it provides you with is the ability to roll a d20 and determine a yes-no outcome based on that d20. It's really simple, it's really easy to run, and I think the idea is that by being simple and easy to run, it's leaving a lot of space for you to embody your character and to act in the world as a player and let your actions inform what's supposed to happen. Right? Like the idea is that you don't look for traps. Instead, you describe how you are looking for traps. And then the GM, or in this case, the GM deck, will tell you how that's going to go. And I think when you're playing with a GM, there can be a lot of joy and creativity and unexpected outcomes from that process. I haven't played Cyborg with a GM, but I have played Vast Grim, which is also in the vein of Morkborg. And when we played that game, I found that I was capable of having an interesting experience that kind of built and evolved in interesting ways. On the other hand, when I'm playing solo, it really just felt like I was, I don't know, trying to describe a scene, and then I'm kind of like, okay, why would I interact with this scene? How would I interact with this scene? Do I want to roll with my strength or agility? I guess so. I don't know. Or maybe I want to fight someone, but then I look at my health and I look at how hard it is to fight someone and think, okay, I could just die if I fight someone, so maybe we don't do that. And ultimately, I found myself saying, why do I want to use any of these rules to do anything? So I had my tone and I had my scenes and I had my GM emulator deck, and all those were working really well. But what was missing was a series of mechanics that would allow me to engage with the scenes and to progress in an interesting way. And for that reason, I think I am going to give Cyborg itself a thumbs down, at least how I played it here in this solo context in the way that it happened today. One other thing I want to bring up is that I felt like my characters were fairly detached from everything that was happening. In Ironsworn, you start off with strong connections to community and strong goals to accomplish by swearing on iron. In contrast, in Cyborg, I felt really like my people were totally detached from the task at hand. Yes, we had this mission, but we don't know why we care about this mission. Yes, we have debt, and so I guess getting money would be kind of nice, but it's not clear why we should care about that debt. And by the way, the whole point of the game is that it's supposed to be, rage-filled, nihilistic, apathetic, etc. So I don't really want to, care about things like paying off my credit card debt. I want to, rage against the corporations or be apathetic about things that are happening in a really cool way. And I just did not really feel like the game or the scenario was giving me a lot of connection to the scene in order to make that happen. So I think that was another reason why I just didn't feel like the cyborg system itself was helping me to have an interesting experience. So to spin this in a more, I don't know, constructive light, I think there are a handful of things that I would have loved to have or that I was missing from Ironsworn, which I think would have been useful for me. First, I really do like Ironsworn's oracles. I like the theme table and the NPC table. I like how those tables dovetail in with the game Ironsworn itself. And that unity means that it's always very clear for me to know where I want to go, if I want to find a table to roll on, and then how to use that table. As I've already said, I have a lot of experience with Ironsworn, so maybe what's going on is I just have more experience, but I do like that. The second thing that I like, and again, this is from Ironsworn, is I would have liked some form of abstract progress bars. In Ironsworn, as you do things, you fill up some progress, and then once you fill up enough progress, you can try to resolve your current quest. It's never certain, it's always some randomness, and the outcomes are cool, but by building up progress, you have control over where things are going, and you have a sense of where things are going. In contrast, despite the fact that we had searched, about half of this guy's apartment, I didn't really feel like anything had evolved or I was any closer to the objective than when I started. Lastly, I think it would have been really useful to have some sort of character motivation or character generation or character drive or something like that. One thing that comes to mind is, for example, the notion from the game Cyberpunk. This is Cyber plus Punk. It's not the Cyberpunk game you're thinking of, it's the Forged in the Dark one. In that game, you are doing the cyberpunk thing, but the notion is that you have one last job that you're doing, and you have some driving motivation for why you're doing that last job. And I think in the context of Cyborg, it would be really cool to have like a major driving motivation that your character can have that would tie them into the world and help them to express themselves in whatever fashion they might like to have. I don't know how that character motivation would tie in with the fact that in Cyborg your characters are just really fragile. So like you could have this cool backstory and then they'll just die. I guess you probably would have to make their motivation be something that is consistent with just dying. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I felt like I was missing that thing. I don't exactly know what that thing would look like in Cyborg, but I think my experience would have been better for it. Anyway, I think that sums up my thoughts on Cyborg here, so I will leave it at that. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you around.